Let's talk about Saturn returns, all right? Specifically, the house that your Saturn is in for your return. Once this retrograde with Saturn is done in Pisces, Saturn in Aries, people, we're gearing up because then Saturn is headed directly into Aries. So I'm personally using this time to prep a little bit. Regardless of that, let's talk about the houses. Saturn brings restrictions. And if you don't follow those restrictions and you try to go outside of those bindings, things can get a little bit rough and tough. There's maybe some extra lessons that you need to learn. So look at your chart. Where's Saturn at for you? And that's the area of your life where you're going to need to set some boundaries and restrictions for yourself. First house is literally the self. So this could be restrictions on when and where you can express yourself. How can you express yourself? Where can you be yourself? Are you welcome in some places and not in others? Restricting what is and is not shared about you. It also could be that you can't get to everything that you want to that has to do with you. Maybe you have a whole bunch of stuff you want to do, but you literally just don't have the time to do it. Second house is resources. So this is going to look like budgeting, finances, making sure that you're not overspending, making sure you have a savings account, making sure that you have those contracts and bank accounts, everything, P's and Q's together. You got your I's and T's dotted, taxes are taken care of, things like that. That's more second house. Taxes is going to be more eighth house, but still related to the financial space. It's also going to look like things like resources. So anything in the physical world, food. If you're a crafter or you're working in the physical with your resources, that's going to also be applicable there. Third house is going to be about your direct communication with people. So if you have Saturn in the third house, that could look like not oversharing. Who can you talk to and why are you spending time talking to that person? Where do you absorb your information from and why are you absorbing your information from those spaces? This could also look like people who have gone through like traditional schooling or like institutionalized learning and having like a setback with your degrees or things like that because you haven't taken the time to properly study or you're like out partying instead of like focusing on your grades. That's just one example, but there's a lot of other examples, especially when it comes to speaking with people. Fourth house is your home. So where are you living? Who are you living with? Ooh, yep. Why are you living there? Who can come in and out of the house? How much time do you spend at the house? Probably a Saturn in the fourth house, you're going to be spending a lot of time at home. And if you don't, things could get a little bit hard. True. Fifth house is your joy and the heart space, as well as like mother, father, child relationships or like intergenerational relationships within your family. Saturn in that area could look like hard relationships with your parents or with your kids, or just having a lot of boundaries and restrictions within that relationship or those relationships. Also, when it comes to your joy, when can you share that joy? How can you share that joy? Where do you get your joy from? People with Saturn in the fifth and the sixth house sometimes could fall prey to like different addictions, or it's more addiction oriented. So just making sure that you have good boundaries around where you're receiving joy from and why you're getting it from that space. Also, how are you activating joy for yourself? That's going to be really important too. Back it up to Saturn in the fourth house. If you have Saturn in the fourth house, pay attention to the moon cycles. Okay, thank me later. Pay attention and interact with them. More than likely, you're going to need it. I say that because the fourth house is modernly ruled by Cancer. That's the moon. Okay, so check your moon placement too. Cool. Sixth house is about your health. It's about how the earth communicates and how your body communicates. So we have the communication of words in the third house, but the sixth house is what is unheard, but we still are in communication with. Especially if you're part of the Saturn and Aries crew that's coming up for your Saturn return. Your mental health is going to be way super connected to your physical health. And so having boundaries and restrictions is going to be really important. People who have Saturn relation to the sixth house, make sure that you have some sort of health regimen for you. And that's going to look different for everybody because are you able-bodied? Are you not? Do you have chronic illnesses? Do you not? Like there's so many different people in the world. And so it's going to look different for every single person. Just make sure that if you do have Saturn in that house and you're studying, that you're taking care of you how you need to be taken care of. That's really what it comes down to. Seventh house is about our mirror spaces. And a lot of people in our astrology will read the seventh house as like your interpersonal connection with your partner, like a significant other specifically. And it is applicable there, but it also has to do, that's true, they go together. And it has to do with best friends and people that you're sharing intellectual intimacy with, emotional intimacy with. Yes, it is our most significant other, but it also has to do with the people who are closest to us, not just that one person. So apply as needed. What are you sharing with them? What gets reflected, and noticing the details of those reflections within that intimacy space is really important, because Libra is where the seventh house is where we bind stuff up. And then the exchanges happen in the eighth house. So You actually have an extra layer of protection when it comes to exchanges if you do have a Saturn in the 7th house. So congrats on that. But just make sure that you have those understandings of who can you bind with and why can you bind with them, and boundaries around that is super important. The 8th house is going to be the exchanges. It also has to do with the adult spicy life, okay? And any inheritance. So anything that's intergenerationally passed down. Saturn in the 8th house is a really hard placement. Saturn in the 12th house also hard. Saturn in the 8th house is really hard. It's really hard. If you have Capricorn or Aquarius in the 8th house, a Saturn in the 8th house, that's a hard placement to have, because then in your exchanges, like when you're signing contracts with people, whether they're written contracts, spoken contracts, unspoken contracts, all right? And there are those exchanges that happen, there's so many different ways that those exchanges can happen. I'm not going to get into like the details, all right? But study your Pluto placement. Go look at your Pluto placement and figure out how your Pluto placement and your Saturn placement are connected if you have a Saturn in the 8th house. And anything Scorpio. That is because Scorpio is the secrets. So it's like the secrets of you, and how do you relate to that Scorpio place? Any Scorpio placements, this house that Scorpio is in for you in your chart. Also Pluto, Mars is going to be related there as well. So Pluto asks that we sit and take the time to study the underworld and the shadows and how we exist in them. So go look at your secrets in those areas, and that will tell you a lot more than I can. And then have boundaries. Have really, 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 really good boundaries. 9th house is about your dreams. Your dreams. You're a dreamer. You have aims. You have goals. You want to do things with your life. Who are you sharing that with? Why are you sharing it with them? What's your purpose, and who is influencing your purpose? Why are they allowed to influence your purpose? And making sure that if you don't need to have other people influence your purpose, that they are not. People with the Saturn in the 9th house are probably going to be people who are taking the long game, like you're going farther, faster by yourself. Probably loners, totally okay though. It is as it needs to be. Also, it has to do with your artistry. How are you an artist? Artist is also 11th house with Aquarius, but the 9th house with Sagittarius has to do with our artistry and forms of creativity and expression. So also traveling, like getting up and moving and going to other places. And so you might be restricted in that. And maybe you don't get to go on vacations, or just making time for when you do have rest and when you don't have rest. Things like that are going to be important for the 9th house. 10th house is a at-home Saturn. So if you have Saturn in the 10th house, that has to do with Saturn stuff, hierarchies, systems that we can't get out of, intergenerational woven stuff that'll take generations to change, that will not change in this lifetime. Also, earning a seat of power. So this is going to look like restrictions at your job. You might have to work extra hours to get that thing that you want. Maybe you're somebody who's built their own business, and now you have to be in charge of everything in the business area. Also, too, if you have a crossover of Saturn in the 8th house, I'm going to go back to the 8th house for a second. Make sure that you are checking the details of any and all contracts that you sign. Look at the footnotes. Moving back to the 10th house. Saturn in the 10th house also requires that you understand how to have the upper hand no matter the level of hierarchy that you are at, and understanding the level of hierarchy that you're at and what the restrictions are within that, and what level of hierarchy do you want to be at? Do you want to be up here? If you're here, do you want to be down here for some reason? Like, what does that look like for you? And really understanding how the systems of hierarchies work in every area of your life. So your job, your social circles, literally in any area. How does the hierarchy fit? How is it set up? And how do you sit within that? And how are you navigating it? It's a lot, okay, but that's going to be the 10th house. The 11th house is your social circles. So that's going to look like, probably if you have goals and you have stuff that you want to get done during that Saturn return, not spending as much time with people. Or if you haven't really learned a lot of the lessons with Saturn, it could also look like a lot of stuff going on within your social circles that just isn't healthy for you. Gossiping, betrayals, different things like that, and creative expression and freedom. So that's also true. Having boundaries around that. Who influences that? Why do they influence it? Why not? We're almost running out of time. So the 12th house. Okay, 12th house has to do with transitions. It's also your spiritual spaces. So Saturn in the 12th house, not sharing your spiritual practice. And if you are, why are you doing it? And making sure that you have good boundaries around that space. Also, too, anytime that you're going through a transition in life, so picking up and moving from one thing to the next, maybe you're moving jobs, or you're moving locations, or you're switching friend groups, or there's so many. It's like every area of life, if you're transitioning through, applicable. It has to be done orderly, and you have to have a plan, and it has to be detailed. Otherwise, you're not going to make it to the other side. You're going to get stuck in the transition. So have a plan. Be ordered about it. And those are the houses for the Saturn return. Hopefully, It's easy to learn with your Saturn return. That's true. Gratitude, reverence, and love to you. And I'll talk to you soon. I can't believe I took the whole 10 minutes to do this. I'll talk to you in the next video.